Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa. I present these videos every week for a couple different reasons. First of which is just to move my brain out of the mode of background work as I kind of work with the text over the course of the week and move into the process of actually writing and preparing the sermon that I'll preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason I do these. Second reason is just to allow you, the viewer, who have come across this video for whatever reason has brought you here today, to gain a little bit of different insight into the text that is assigned for the week. So that is why I do these. This particular Sunday, which is August 28th, 2016, the 15th Sunday after Pentecost, our gospel lesson comes out of Luke chapter 14, verse 1, and then skipping ahead to verses 7 through 14. I had to think about that for a second there. This is kind of a continuation of a series isn't the right way to think about it, but of a theme that has emerged in recent weeks in terms of what Jesus is allowed to do on the Sabbath and things that happen on the Sabbath. Now, all of chapter 14 actually takes place within a single setting, this part included, as well as the little snippet in verses 2 through 6. And then what comes after from verses 15 on through the end of the chapter. It all kind of happens in the same situation. It's this one Sabbath day, and Jesus has been invited to a banquet, this time at the home of the leader of the Pharisees, so a definite bigwig. And along the way, he heals a man on the Sabbath, and when he's kind of criticized a little bit for it, or people are kind of starting to be like, "Hey, you can't do that." He lays out a kind of a very similar theme to what we saw last week with who of you, if your ox or your child falls in a hole on the Sabbath, would not help them out work. It's kind of a duh moment. So that's kind of that part there. And then he gets to the meal or gets to the banquet, and we kind of move into what I'll read here momentarily. And then one thing kind of leads to the next thing, which then expands on into the next thing throughout this whole chapter. So it's sort of Sabbath oriented, and it's sort of not the portion that we're actually using today. It doesn't necessarily matter that it's on a Sabbath day, but that's kind of the setting. So keep in mind, we're also still within the travel narrative for Luke. After Jesus has turned his face towards Jerusalem, he's intentionally moving towards the cross always as this goes on. That's a very lengthy chunk of Luke's gospel, and this is in the midst of it. So still happening. So everything that's still happening has that cross in mind for Jesus, endgame, and even beyond endgame, the resurrection and overcoming the power of death, and perhaps the heavenly banquet that lies before us in the resurrection. So keep all of that in mind as I read this. That's kind of some of the background, some of the in seminary, it's a big fancy word they call eschatological, which means like ultimate end days, end game notion of God, kind of a real layman's way of saying that. But anyway, so that's kind of all in the background where we're at. So let's jump in. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them this parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited And the host who invited both you tongue tie. I'm going to try that again. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place," and then in disgrace you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Okay, so that's the gospel for today, and it's kind of, again, same setting, but kind of like two separate little situations going on here, though of course connected. First of all, so Jesus goes to the banquet. He's been invited in. And as we hear at the beginning, it's at the home of a very prominent Pharisee. So not only the religious elite, but like the leader of them. So whoever this dude is, he's a bigwig society-wise, because of course the Pharisees were the religious elite, and since in the Jewish culture, religion and regular life were so closely tied together, he would have had very high status in terms of social speaking. So to be invited to this particular place, this particular banquet, first of all, is high honor, and so for those who would be there, it's very much like social standing. Where do I fall on the social ladder? Am I here? Am I here? Am I here? And now for us today, if we think about it in terms of like if we go to a table or if we go to a banquet of some sort, for the most part, there's really not like those places of honor. There might be like the leader's table. And there might, or like if we go to a wedding banquet, there's the wedding party's table, and maybe like the family table, at least the weddings I go to. But in addition to that, it's not like, okay, socially I can sit here. Socially I can sit there. But in this culture, it was very much like where you were placed on the table, where you sat at the table, it was very closely tied to your social status. And so that's what Jesus sees. He sees these guests. They're kind of jockeying for position at the table. And he just observes that. And so he says to them, what is better for you to do? And this is kind of odd. This seems almost shrewd on the part of Jesus that he would go here. And he's talking about social standing. But so he says, when you go there, sit at the lowest spot. Because if you sit at the low spot, the spot of lowest honor, when your host comes in and he sees you there, he's going to move you up. He's going to say, no, you don't belong there. You move farther up, move closer, move to the seat of honor. And those who see it, you'll be honored that way. But on the flip side, if you try and place yourself and you place yourself higher than you ought to, then he might come in and be like, what are you doing? You don't belong there. And then you get kicked down and you are humbled, like humiliated almost in front of everyone. So that's kind of what he's talking about there. And it seems odd. It's like at first Jesus is talking about like social standing and like how to be shrewd when it comes to your political acumen of where you sit at the table. Seems a little odd to me. And even the second part is again socially minded, though perhaps this sounds a little bit more Jesus-like when he then talks to the host. And he says, when you have a party or when you throw a banquet, don't invite the people who you're expected to invite, or those who can repay you with favors your direction or will invite you back, but invite those who can't repay, who physically cannot repay you. The outcasts, the socially unacceptable, they're the ones to invite, and you will be rewarded in the resurrection. And in fact, when I looked at the translation, it almost seemed like at the resurrection you are rewarded. So basically, the resurrection itself that you will experience is your reward. Again, odd, because this passage basically seems like social how-to succeed in social situations without really trying. Yes, that was a Broadway reference, if you happen to know what I'm talking about. But this isn't the type of stuff that Jesus usually talks about, and especially not the whole like where do you sit in the banquet thing. And so there's a lot of different thoughts about, well, what's going on here, and is Jesus, like in the first part, is he just talking about the importance of being humble? Maybe. But why are we humble? If we think about the great equalizer that is life and sin and flawed reality and death, we're all on the same playing field. Now, it may not seem like that in life, but that's the reality. And if we're honest and we're realistic, we will realize that. And so then we begin to question, well, if Jesus is calling us to be humble before who? Who is the host that we want to be humble before? Because it's not about being humble before other people, though that's important. Not to think more highly of yourself than you ought to, but humble before the host. Well, who is the host that's going to invite us into the heavenly banquet? If we're thinking about that, the eschatological thing that I talked about a little bit earlier, like, who's the host? Well, the host is God. God is the one who invites us into the kingdom. Or maybe we could say that Jesus is the one that invites us into the kingdom. But Jesus is, of course, God in human form, so it's God. God is inviting us. God is the host. And we come into it not because there's anything that we can do, not because there's anything that we can repay, but because God desires to invite us. And I think about the notion kind of twofold. A, we've got long-term, the eternal life. And then we've also got the notion that the kingdom of heaven is here now, and that Jesus has brought the kingdom to us, and it is breaking into our reality in ways that we can't understand, in ways that we can't quite put our finger on, but we are invited into it. And why? Because God chooses to, not because we've earned it, and that's the whole grace thing, not because we deserve it, but because God chooses to invite us out of his love for us. So that's kind of what's happening in this passage. It's an odd passage, and preaching on it's going to be tricky. And I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do with it yet, but that's kind of what's happening. And those are the thoughts that I have, is this notion of be humble. Yes, we have given gifts. Yes, we are given talents. Yes, we have blessings of many different kinds, and that's wonderful. But what's the source? Because it's not us. We are not the source, so be humble. And remember that there is one who is greater than us. Even if we happen to be the greatest person ever, we still fall short, and there is one who is greater than we are. So that's what's happening. I hope you have a great week. If you have thoughts or questions or comments, by all means, throw those down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, we'll catch you next time, and God bless.